So, hello everybody. Tonight I'm going to do another talkie, and tonight I'm going to talk about how important are systems, or do systems matter? So the reason why I'm talking about systems today is, of course, that a couple of weeks ago, D&D, Wizards of the Coast, announced that there's going to be one D&D. So lots of people were speculating that there was going to be a new version of D&D, a new edition of D&D. Um, as it seems now, this is not the case. What Wizards have said is that whatever they're going to produce, one D&D is going to not be an evolution, it's not going to be a revolution, it's going to be an evolution, and anything is supposed to be completely downward compatible. So they're not even talking about editions anymore. And for those of you who are interested, if you have a free D&D Beyond account, you can actually see the playtest material. I'm not that interested really because I have so many systems at home that I don't really need a new one. I do play D&D. We all use the fifth edition rules. I also want to play AD&D second edition at some point, but to me, really, the editions or the systems are of not that much relevance. So I'm not really kind of like afraid of what Wizards are going to do, just like I'm not afraid of what is going to happen with Germany's oldest role-playing game, Midgard. For those of you who are following the German market, last year it was announced that Midgard will be handed over to Pegasus Spiele. And they will be producing the sixth edition of the rules. So, of course, uh, in order to understand what's going on there and why this is happening and why D&D Wizards and D&D are moving to new versions, let's all call them editions in the case of D&D, because they basically say it's not a new edition, is of course they want to make money. And the problem with role-playing games, and I hadn't really thought about this, but I saw a really interesting vlog yesterday from a lady from Northern Ireland who basically deals with tabletop war games like Games Workshop, that kind of thing. But she was also talking about D&D, one D&D, D&D Beyond, and what's in store there from a very different perspective, which I'd never really thought about. But she also pointed out, and she's making a really good case for her train of thought, that of course no one gets rich when you make role-playing games. And the reason is that role-playing is probably one of the few hobbies that you can follow even if you're poor. The reason for that is that when you look at D&D 5th edition, really the only things that you need are two books, the Player's Handbook and the Monster Manual. The Dungeon Master's Guide is a nice to have if you would like to get tips on how to create your own world or create stories, that kind of thing. Or if you don't have money for this, you can just go to YouTube and watch all kinds of playthroughs of existing campaigns that are official or of people just running their own games to get a feeling for what a game should look like. And there are also so many different channels that explain how to write adventures, how to be your own solo DM. Geek Gamers is one of them. Um, so even if you have no money at all, if you have access to the internet, you can get a wealth of information. And of course, there are lots of message boards and Reddits that will tell you what you need to do to run a game. And then when you say that maybe a gaming group consists of 5 people, 1 DM, 4 players, between these 5 people, they just need to spend round about, I don't know, maybe 60, $80 on the Player's Handbook and the Monster Manual. They can split this by 5, so it's less than 20 per person, and you're good to go. And they don't really need to buy anything else from Wizards. And while sales have gone up for Dungeons and Dragons, and apparently 2021 was one of the most successful D&D years in or since Gary Gygax first made millions and millions with TSR. Of course, during the pandemic, lots of people got into the hobby or rekindled their love for the hobby. Um, while sales are up, when you think of the fact that there are 50 million people apparently worldwide who play D&D, It's not like they make money of each of these 50 million people. Because unlike tabletop wargaming, where you do have to build your own armies, where you have to get your paints, where you have to get your models, everyone who really is engaged in that hobby needs to buy stuff. In role-playing games, that's not the case. And so, if you do want to make money, you do have to come up with new products to buy. And again, when you look at the structure of D&D, because that's the one that most people are familiar with, if you buy a campaign like we're playing Curse of Strahd, at the moment there are 5 people involved in this. We've got 4 players and 1 DM. Only the DM really needs Curse of Strahd, and actually everybody else should not even read it, at least not until we've completed the campaign, because it would spoil them. So again, this book costs maybe $40. She spent $40 on it. That's it. I mean, I know one person at least, maybe even 2, who don't even have the player's handbook, because you get your online tools like, Roll20, you don't have to pay for that, or you get a free character sheet. Then somebody helps you with the character creation. I mean, we're playing Call of Cthulhu in October. One person doesn't have any books, none. So basically, I did the character creation with them. No problem there. But again, we are going to keep engaged with the Curse of Strahd for months and months. It's going to be hundreds of hours that we will be spending on this between us, but only one person bought the book. So again, wizards aren't making a lot of money. So in order to keep making money, you have to make changes. Now, the fact that they're saying the changes will be such that whatever they're going to produce is going to be downward compatible. So if you've got 5th edition, whatever D&D or 1D&D or whatever they want to call it, will be like, whatever they're going to put out with regard to materials should also be 5e compatible, means that I, for example, wouldn't even have to buy new books. I could look at the adventures that they're putting out, make a decision, do I want them? But I wouldn't have to migrate my system. I'm not sure if this is actually going to be true, because they want to make money, of course, and they have to, because they're a company, they're not a charity. But with Midgard, you see it quite clearly. Pegasus is taking over this role-playing system, and they're going to churn out a completely new rule set. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be compatible. I believe that they're probably going to do away with the D100 and D20 mix. It's probably going to be a D20 system, because D20 is a lot more accessible, because lots of people know it because they have been playing D&D. And I believe that it's going to be a lot less like the current Midgard that we have, and I believe it's going to be a lot more streamlined and reduced. This is just what I believe, because if I was going to do this, I would do the same, because I want it to be a lot like 5e, because as we know, with 5e and Dungeons and Dragons, or D&D 1, or 1D&D, whatever you want to call it, people are used to it. It's like very present everywhere. And there are so many franchises that now hop on the 5e train, like the One Ring, etc. You've got Call of Cthulhu 5e, that kind of thing. So lots of people use the 5e system for their worlds. And this is where the question, does system matter, come in? Um, to me, system does and doesn't matter. Because I have played so many systems that I've lost count. But currently I'm playing, I want to say, 5 different systems. I'm playing World of Darkness, Chronicle of Darkness. I'm playing the basic role-playing game. I'm playing Midgard. I'm playing 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I'm playing Beyond the Wall. Oh, and 6th, I'm playing Das Schwarze Auge DSA. So these are just the ones where I have an ongoing game, on and off at least. Um, And most recently, I've got myself RuneQuest, role-playing in Glorantha, which of course is the basic role-playing system by Chaosium, which we're also familiar with from Call of Cthulhu. but in a slightly different flavor because, of course, it is targeted towards fantasy role-playing, whereas the BRP Call of Cthulhu flavor is, of course, geared towards the Call of Cthulhu horror role-playing games. So some of the feats and abilities are different, but at its core, the two are identical. So when I look at how systems influence my own play, I can say that today I'm more interested in the story and in the world. And if a world comes with a particular system that needs to be used in order to experience this world, I will learn the system. So, for example, if you want to play vampire or changeling, I believe it's going to be very difficult to not use the Chronicles of Darkness, World of Darkness system, because the way the world is played out is reflected in the systems. The systems are very similar, so you've got glamour for the changelings, you've got blood points for the for the vampires, you've got gnosis for the werewolves, but a lot of things like the different abilities, the different uh, th uh, things like perception, etc., charisma, they are identical. You know, vampires may have some things that you don't find in the changelings. Vampires can, for example, some of them can cast spells like the Tremere, but of course, changelings, almost all of them have some kind of spell that they can perform. Werewolves, I don't believe, have spells, they have other things. So, of course, you have different flavors, but at its core, the system is the same. You have a dice pool which you use, you roll d10s, and then different things happen. And the more experienced or the better you are at a skill or an ability, the more dice you roll, and then the result is whatever. I would find it difficult for me to see how I could transfer this to a completely different system. Let's say the basic role-playing system or 5e. I'm not saying it can't be done, but to me, it would mean a lot of work, a lot of thinking. So I'm like, I'm not even interested. At the same time, I'm currently going through RuneQuest, and I've already played one of the battle encounters in the starter set, and I got massacred. So first of all, I think that they're kind of underestimating the danger that these creatures in this one encounter pose, because they say, oh, they're very fragile. You should make sure that it's a really challenging fight. So you have to have one enemy per player character. So I played with two player characters and two enemies. One of my player characters got slaughtered in the first round and was dropped to -5 hit points. He was instantly dead. So no, they're not fragile because I hacked off one of the enemy's legs, but since they have 8 legs, it doesn't make any difference. Actually, it didn't really impair them at all. And of course, if you know RuneQuest play role-playing in Glorantha, you will know that the battle system is uh, convoluted to be, or complex to be, to put it nicely, or completely over the top, old-fashioned, not good at all, unstreamlined, taking a lot of time. uh, I want to die, if you don't want to put it mildly. So now one could say, okay, then what is your solution to this? My solution to this is I do want to play RuneQuest, and I've already got a volunteer, so we will play one or two adventures just to get a feeling for it, because I really like the idea behind it, and I think the world itself is very intriguing. And I like the idea of the rune-based magic and the runes, but I will actually not use the combat system. I will adapt the combat system, and I will use a mixture of 5e and Midgard fights. It's possible. I've already done it in my head. I've worked out the rules, and it's going to be fine. It will not be RuneQuest vanilla. If you are a RuneQuest purist, you'll probably run a mile, but it'll serve the purpose of being able to tell the story, of being able to role play in Glorantha with all of the runes, all of the magic that is there, which is different from, let's say, magic in 5th edition or also magic in Midgard. But it'll make it possible to play in such a way that I will enjoy it. So here, the system matters in parts because the runes are part of the system, and I don't know how to adapt this in 5e or in Midgard. But the parts of the system that I don't like, I just take from somewhere else. So the system is here less important to me than being able to play in that world. And then, of course, you can just go, yeah, but I just want to play a fantasy role-playing game. I just want to play with elves and halflings and, like fight dragons and have great adventures somewhere in wherever. What would you suggest? And in that case, I would actually say if you are not into diversification of your character a lot, if you're happy with 10 or 12 features that you can roll against, 12 stats, go with 5e. Why? First of all, widely accessible. A lot of information is out there. You don't even need to buy anything except the player's handbook to create a character. If you don't like the race tiefling, call them something else. It is endlessly changeable and adaptable. If, like me, you think that 5e is a little too streamlined, things like, oh, you heal all the damage overnight, that's very unrealistic. Or you would like to have more diversification in your character, you want them to have more abilities, different abilities, then I would say Midgard is a good option. The only problem with Midgard is it's not available in English. Or I would say go with RuneQuest. The basic role-playing part of it and how to build a character, leaving out all of the Gloranthan backstory, which is possible, leaving out the runes, which is possible, just stick with the normal magic. They distinguish between rune magic, spirit magic, and sorcery, I believe. Sorcery, I find still a little bit opaque. I read it. It's something that's very rare. So I was like, okay, none of the characters that I'll be playing with will have sorcery, so I didn't really go into it. But even runes, I mean, that makes sense. Make a choice. Are you more the death person or the life person? Are you more the moon person or the sun person or whatever? Are you earth? Are you water? Those elements are still there. You could use that. It will make for great character play if that's your thing. You can say, yes, in my world this exists. If you say you don't, then you just don't use it. You just create your character, you get the basic stats, the attributes strength, dexterity, charisma, constitution. You just roll them up like you do for in the rules. Then you add all of the abilities. So you say, okay, so I want to be a fighter. They have archetypes that you can use: fighter, hunter, blah blah blah. You can do this. You can leave out all of the racial traits or the cultural traits that are used in the game if you don't like them. Or you can say, yes, this person comes from the desert. Oh, there are people who live in the desert. I'm just going to take those. So here you would be able to produce a really good fantasy setting yourself using this rule set. And there the system is the only thing is kind of like the guidelines that you need in order to run the game. And for a fantasy game that is available in English and uses the 100 system, which I actually prefer to the D20 system, I would just say go with RuneQuest. It is based on the basic role-playing rule set, and it is very basic. You roll a D100. Very simple math. You've got three different ways of rolling a success. Normal success, hard success, critical success. And if you roll a 0-1, you've impaled. You can say, oh, I don't want to parry. Okay, leave out the parrying. You just say, I attack you, you get to attack me. It's an opposed roll, and whoever gets the higher but still or the better success, makes the hit. and the other person doesn't. So you can change the combat in very many ways, and there are tips on the internet how to do this. So coming back to will I move with the systems? Well, I will not, definitely not get whatever sixth edition is going to be called, if it's one D&D or D&D forever, because I don't need to. 5e is a system that works for me, and I am totally able to take whatever story I want to tell and transfer it. I mean, I have transferred DSA from fourth edition, third edition to fifth edition. You just have to check what kind of monsters there are, find their normal stats in 5e and reuse them. Not a problem. I have taken stories from Midgard and transferred them to DSA. I have taken stories from DSA, put them into 5th edition. I have taken, oh, sorry, to Midgard. I have taken stories that don't exist in any role-playing game and I've put them into Call of Cthulhu because they're Cthulhu-esque. They are kind of like a little bit horrific, and the system lends itself to it. Having said this, I'm not a fan of Chaosium, Call of Cthulhu. I think most of their productions are really bad. I don't like their stories, their adventures at all because they're not horrific and they don't understand how horror actually works. But the system, if you leave out all of this cosmic horror, the system is super robust, very easy to use, and very versatile. So, and with now RuneQuest, I've got a BRP system, basic role-playing system, that works for fantasy games. So, hey, I'm fine with that. I could imagine myself taking the RuneQuest part or even the Midgard part, because Midgard isn't too far away from RuneQuest, only combat is a lot easier. And just use that for my, like role playing needs in the fantasy area. There is one thing that I will say, and I'm now going back to the lady from Northern Ireland who did an amazing job in drawing my attention to something that I didn't know about 1D&D. Because they did mention D&D Beyond and some kind of, like 3D dungeon experience. Now, we saw that with fourth edition. They had put out something similar because fourth edition, of course, was a huge revolution. It changed D&D completely from 3.5 to fourth edition was a huge change and a huge jump. And I'm not going to go into whether it was good or bad because I know that this is a very contentious issue. And since I have never played fourth edition, I don't know if the change was really so terrible. I really enjoyed the fact that it was a lot more miniatures based. So whenever I saw people play fourth edition, I was kind of like, oh, that reminds me of when I was younger because I really enjoy, like tabletop wargaming and I like having like, tactical battles. But she pointed out that one of the things that they're trying to do is apparently, and I'm I'm not sure if this is actually going to happen, but they're going to really use the D&D Beyond engine. And the idea seems to be that the dungeon master and the players can build the dungeon together. So I'm not sure how this works. Probably the dungeon master has to set it up, or maybe there are pre-generated dungeons. But then within that dungeon, you can get your own tokens, you can get your own player figurines, like virtual figurines. And apparently you can make them look like what you want them to look like, but you have to pay. So it's like what we do. We are really into our character portraits, so we get artists to draw our character portraits. We pay them for it, and those of you who have been following our channel will have seen some of those portraits. So we have them in the vampire, the masquerade scenarios. We also have them in the patrons only Dungeons and Dragons. We also have them in Curse of Strahd. So we basically decided what we want to look like. We found our artists. We've got a couple of artists that we work with, and I'm very happy to feature their art because they're brilliant. But of course, we commission this work, so we pay them for it, and then we get the portraits back. But it's really just like a one-time thing. Whereas apparently in D&D Beyond, they want to do this like a DLC, like a microtransaction. And then you can get more features, and then you can get this, and you can get a mohawk, and you can get this, and you can get that. And oh, I've now got a different shield, so I'm now going to get a different shield for my virtual character. What she was pointing out, first of all, that's what she said they are planning on doing, or that's what she says is going to happen down the line. And that's, of course, a money-making machine because it's a little bit like subscribing to an MMO and you keep doing this and you can, where you can get different skins and that kind of thing, where you pay for this, blah, blah, blah. And she says that um, there is a danger there. And that is that certain people in the hobby will find it really difficult to say no and just to step back from this and not engage with this microtransaction system. Apparently, studies have been done that show that people with very low impulse control find it really difficult to resist this. And if you have lots of people who are playing who are maybe even very young, they will go like, oh, I want this. And if it's just a couple of dollars, it's like your cookie money and you can do it. But over time, you're going to sink a lot of money into this. And of course, one could say, yeah, that's their way of making money because otherwise they can't make money because role-playing games don't make money for the companies. Of course, Wizards of the Coast is making most of their money with Magic. Of course, because again, anybody who wants to play Magic has to buy the cards. It's not enough for one person to buy the cards, everybody has to buy them. So while I'm not sure if this is really what's going to happen, and I'm also not sure if people are really going to go down that road, because while we use Roll20 for D&D because it is convenient to have the tactical battles and to have the maps and stuff, we would not use D&D Beyond to basically build a virtual dungeon and everybody gets their own avatars and stuff. Tokens in Roll20 are just as good. So if this is what they're going to try and do, One D&D is not going to affect me at all. I'm not going to buy any more books because I don't need another player's handbook. I'm happy creating characters with what I've got. Tasha, Xanathar. Although does Xanathar have something to do with character creation? I think it does. But I mean, even those are optional. My cleric that I'm playing is straight from the book, from the player's handbook. There is no additional stuff. The only thing that we used a website that has all of the feats together. But even the one I think that I got, Warcaster, is in the player's handbook. Yeah, so for me, one D&D will not have any impact. Midgard 6th edition won't have any impact either. I've got Midgard 5th edition. I've got everything there is. I've got old Midgard stuff, which, by the way, I have transferred to Midgard 5th edition. No problem at all. Yes, the monsters are different. They have different values. You just take the bestiary of the 5th edition. You just replace the values from there. It's going to be fine. But other than that, to me, the system only matters if the world and the setting that I'm playing is so closely connected with the system that the system is irreplaceable without, or almost irreplaceable. And if I wanted to replace it with something else, I would have to spend a lot of time. However, if I've got a world and I've got a system that is kind of okay, but there are a couple of issues, then I will tweak them, like I did with RuneQuest, like we did with Midgard. There are some things in Midgard that we don't do. And so to me, systems matter a lot less, and people should not be too freaked out or worried when a, de a game developer says, oh, we're going to bring out a new edition. You don't have to go with it. You can stay where you are. You can buy campaigns. At the moment, we're playing, or we're going to end up playing a campaign. My players don't know this. That is second edition AD&D. I'm still waiting for the books to hit my shelf, but once they are here, I'm gonna start reading, and it's gonna crawl into our D&D campaign. I will convert some of the things. There are ways in which things can be converted, and the rest is all in the mind. It's about the story. And so system matters, but what matters more is the story. And if you've got a good story, you just need to find a system that works. And that system can be fifth edition if you want to be really quick, off the mark, if you want to get new people involved, because fifth edition is super streamlined and very easy to grasp. And that's all from my end. Have a lovely rest of the day. Bye.